In the darkest moments of human history, when death stalks the streets and hope seems like a forgotten dream, sometimes salvation comes from the most unexpected places. What would you do if you discovered that the gentle nurse who bandaged your wounds by day was the same person who protected you with deadly precision by night? This is the extraordinary true story of a woman who lived two lives, one dedicated to healing, the other to eliminating those who threatened the innocent. In a war-torn city where every shadow could hide an enemy, she became both angel of mercy and phantom of justice. Her story will challenge everything you think you know about the thin line between saving lives and taking them. The morning sun cast long shadows across the rubble-strewn streets of Sarajevo as Elena Petrov walked quickly toward the hospital. Her white nursing uniform was already stained with dust from the dangerous journey through the city's war-torn neighborhoods. At 28, she had seen enough suffering to last several lifetimes, yet her gentle brown eyes still held compassion for every patient who entered the overcrowded medical facility. The year was 1993, and the siege of Sarajevo had transformed the once beautiful city into a nightmare of constant danger. Snipers positioned in the surrounding hills picked off civilians with ruthless efficiency, turning simple activities like getting water or visiting family into potentially fatal missions. The hospital where Elena worked had become a sanctuary of hope and a landscape of despair, but even there, death was a frequent visitor. Marko Kovic, the chief surgeon, greeted Elena with tired eyes as she entered the emergency ward. The 60-year-old man had barely slept in weeks, operating on victims of the ongoing conflict with limited supplies and equipment. "Elena, we have 3 new casualties from Sniper Alley," he said, referring to the notorious stretch of road where enemy marksmen claimed countless lives. 2 children and an elderly woman. The woman might not make it. Elena nodded grimly and immediately went to work. The first child, a boy of perhaps 10 years old, had taken shrapnel in his leg. His eyes were wide with terror, and he clutched a small wooden toy soldier that had somehow survived the blast that injured him. Elena knelt beside his stretcher, her voice soft and reassuring. "What's your name, brave soldier?" she asked, gently examining his wound while cleaning it with precious antiseptic. "Milan," the boy whispered, tears streaming down his dirt-covered face. "Is my mama okay?" "She was with me when the shooting started." Elena's heart clenched, but she maintained her calm exterior. "The doctors are taking very good care of everyone who was brought in. Right now, I need you to be strong while I fix your leg, okay?" As she worked on Milan's injuries, Elena's mind wandered to the previous night. While the city slept fitfully under the constant threat of bombardment, she had been awake in a very different capacity. Positioned on the roof of an abandoned building 3 kilometers away, she had watched through the scope of a modified hunting rifle as enemy soldiers prepared to attack a refugee shelter. 3 careful shots had ended their plans permanently. Nobody at the hospital knew about Elena's nighttime activities. To her colleagues, she was simply a dedicated nurse who somehow managed to navigate the dangerous streets without injury. They attributed her survival to luck and divine protection, never suspecting that their gentle colleague possessed skills that would terrify them. Elena had learned to shoot as a child, taught by her grandfather, who had been a hunter in the mountains before the war. When the conflict began and her younger brother was killed by a sniper while trying to reach their elderly parents, something inside her had changed. She realized that healing the wounded wasn't enough when new victims arrived every day. Someone had to stop the killers at their source. The elderly woman Dr. Kovic had mentioned was brought to Elena's station later that afternoon. Anna Marik was 73 years old and had been struck by sniper fire while hanging laundry on her apartment balcony. The bullet had punctured her lung, and her breathing was labored and painful. "Please," Anna whispered, gripping Elena's hand with surprising strength. "My grandson, he's only 15. If I don't make it home tonight, he'll try to find food on his own. The snipers will kill him." Elena felt the familiar burning sensation in her chest that always preceded her most dangerous decisions. She squeezed Anna's hand gently. "Tell me where your grandson is. I'll make sure he gets food safely." Anna provided the address of her apartment building, located in one of the most dangerous sectors of the city. Elena memorized every detail while continuing to treat the woman's injuries. As the sun began to set, she made her preparations for another sleepless night. The hospital's basement had been converted into sleeping quarters for staff members who lived too far away to risk the journey home each night. Alina had claimed a small corner space where she kept a few personal belongings in a battered suitcase. Hidden beneath a false bottom in that suitcase was her most precious possession, a disassembled rifle that her grandfather had modified for maximum accuracy. After midnight, when the hospital grew quiet except for the soft sounds of patients breathing and the distant rumble of artillery, Elena slipped out through a service exit. She moved through the shadows like a ghost, her years of navigating the dangerous city having taught her which routes were least likely to be monitored by enemy forces. The apartment building where Anna's grandson lived was a 20-minute walk through territories controlled by opposing factions. Elena carried a backpack filled with medical supplies as her cover story if questioned, but she also had her disassembled rifle hidden beneath the bandages and antibiotics. She reached the building without incident and climbed to the 6th floor using the darkened stairwell. The door to Anna's apartment was slightly ajar, and Elena could hear the soft crying of a young person inside. She knocked gently and identified herself as a nurse from the hospital. Peter Maracad was indeed 15, thin from months of inadequate nutrition, with prematurely aged eyes that had seen too much suffering. When Elena explained that his grandmother was alive but injured, relief flooded his face. "I was so scared," he admitted, leading her into the small apartment. "When she didn't come home, I thought—" He couldn't finish the sentence. Elena spent an hour with Petar, giving him food supplies she had brought from the hospital and teaching him safer routes to obtain water and necessities. As she prepared to leave, the teenager asked a question that made her blood freeze. "Nurse Elena, have you heard about the phantom sniper? Some people are saying there's someone out there killing the enemy soldiers who target civilians. My friend thinks it's just propaganda, but I hope it's true." Elena kept her expression neutral. "I focus on saving lives, not taking them," she replied truthfully, though the statement didn't reveal the full complexity of her situation. As she left Peter's building and began the dangerous journey back to the hospital, Elena reflected on the dual nature of her existence. During the day, she was a healer, using her hands to mend broken bodies and her voice to comfort terrified souls. At night, she became something else entirely, a guardian angel with a rifle, protecting the innocent by eliminating those who threatened them. The transformation wasn't easy. Each person she killed in her role as the phantom sniper stayed with her, appearing in her dreams and haunting her quiet moments. But then she would see patients like Milan and Anna, victims of senseless violence, and she would remember why she had chosen this path. 3 blocks from the hospital, Elena heard the distinctive crack of sniper fire coming from a building ahead. Someone was trapped in the open courtyard between 2 apartment complexes, crying for help. Without hesitation, Elena found a concealed position and began assembling her rifle. Through her scope, she could see the enemy sniper positioned in a window on the 4th floor of the damaged building. He was systematically preventing rescue workers from reaching a wounded civilian who had been caught in the open during an artillery barrage. The wounded person was a woman, possibly someone's mother or daughter, bleeding slowly while help remained just meters away. Elena steadied her breathing and calculated the distance, wind direction, and the slight movement of her target. The shot would be difficult, requiring precision that would impress even her grandfather. She had one opportunity, as the sound would immediately reveal her position to other enemy forces in the area. The rifle's report echoed through the courtyard, and the enemy sniper slumped forward. Within minutes, rescue workers reached the wounded civilian and began providing medical aid. Elena quickly disassembled her weapon and melted back into the shadows, another night's work completed. By dawn, she was back in the hospital, tending to patients and offering comfort to those who had survived the latest round of violence. Dr. Kovic noticed her tired appearance but attributed it to the emotional strain of working in such conditions. "Elena, you should rest more," he said during their morning briefing. "This work is taking a toll on all of us, but you seem to be pushing yourself harder than most." Elena managed a weary smile. "Someone has to be here for them," she replied, gesturing toward the ward full of patients. "These people need to know that someone cares about their survival." What Dr. Kovic couldn't see was the weight Elena carried, not just from the patients she treated, but from the lives she had taken to protect them. Each day brought new moral complexities, new decisions about life and death that extended far beyond the walls of the medical facility. As she worked through that morning treating gunshot wounds and comforting traumatized children, Elena wondered how long she could maintain her double existence. The city's nightmare showed no signs of ending, and each night brought new threats to the people she had sworn to protect. The phantom sniper had become a legend among the city's survivors, a mysterious figure who seemed to appear wherever civilians were threatened. But for Elena, there was no legend, only the exhausting reality of trying to heal a wounded city while fighting a secret war against those who would destroy it. That afternoon brought news that would change everything. A group of foreign journalists had arrived in the city to document the siege, and among them was a war correspondent who specialized in investigating the conflict's most mysterious figures. Elena overheard Dr. Coalition Kovac discussing the journalist's interest in finding and interviewing the phantom sniper. The hunt for her secret identity had begun. James Mitchell had covered conflicts in 12 different countries, but the siege of Sarajevo presented him with a mystery unlike any he had encountered before. The British war correspondent had arrived in the city 3 weeks earlier, initially focused on documenting the humanitarian crisis. However, stories about the phantom sniper had quickly captured his professional curiosity and refused to let go. The evidence was undeniable, even if the identity remained hidden. Over the past 6 months, enemy snipers targeting civilians had been systematically eliminated by an unknown marksman whose precision and timing suggested professional military training. Yet no military unit in the defending forces claimed responsibility for these operations, and the Phantom's methods were unlike anything used by organized resistance groups. Elena watched James from across the hospital's main corridor as he interviewed patients and staff members. The journalist was in his early 40s, with graying hair and intelligent blue eyes that seemed to notice every detail around him. His questions were careful and respectful, but Elena could sense the determination beneath his polite exterior. The Phantom appears to specifically target those who threaten non-combatants, James was explaining to Dr. Kovac during an interview. Elena pretended not to overhear. 7 confirmed eliminations in the past month alone, all enemy snipers who were positioned to target civilians in essential activities like gathering water or seeking medical care. Kovac nodded thoughtfully. Whoever this person is, they're saving lives. Yesterday, Mrs. Petkovic was able to reach the market safely because someone eliminated the sniper who had been terrorizing that sector for weeks. Elena felt a chill as she realized James was building a comprehensive timeline of the Phantom's activities. His methodical approach reminded her of the patience required for long-distance shooting, and she wondered if he might be more dangerous to her secret than enemy soldiers. That evening, Elena faced her most challenging night yet. Intelligence gathered through the hospital's network of contacts indicated that enemy forces were planning a major offensive against a refugee shelter housing over 200 displaced families. The attack was scheduled for dawn, and the shelter's location made evacuation impossible without massive casualties. Elena knew that stopping this attack would require more than eliminating a single sniper. She would need to take unprecedented risks and potentially expose herself to capture or death. As she prepared her equipment in the hospital basement, she considered the possibility that this might be her final mission. The refugee shelter was located in a former school building surrounded by open ground that offered little cover for attackers, but also made approach extremely dangerous. Elena's plan required her to position herself in an abandoned apartment building 400 meters away, where she would have clear sightlines to multiple enemy positions. Moving through the city at night had become second nature to Elena. But tonight felt different. She carried additional ammunition and emergency medical supplies, knowing that if she were wounded, reaching help would be nearly impossible. The weight of responsibility pressed down on her shoulders as she thought about the family sleeping peacefully in the shelter, unaware of the danger approaching with the sunrise. The abandoned building smelled of smoke and decay, its windows blown out by artillery fire weeks earlier. Elena climbed to the 8th floor, where she found a position with an unobstructed view of the routes the attacking forces would likely use. She assembled her rifle with practiced efficiency and settled in to wait. Through her scope, Elena could see the enemy soldiers beginning their advance just before dawn. They moved in small groups, clearly confident that their superior numbers and coordination would overwhelm the shelter's minimal defenses. What they didn't know was that their movements were being tracked by someone who had spent months studying their tactics and weaknesses. The first shot eliminated the enemy commander, causing immediate confusion among his troops. Elena quickly repositioned within the building, using different windows to make it appear that multiple snipers were defending the shelter. Her second and third shots disabled the radio operators, preventing the attacking forces from coordinating their response. For 20 minutes, Elena held off an entire assault force through precise shooting and constant movement. Enemy soldiers who tried to advance across the open ground found themselves exposed to deadly accurate fire from unexpected angles. Those who sought cover discovered that their hiding places offered no protection from Elena's elevated position. But the sustained engagement came at a cost. Elena's position was eventually identified, and enemy forces began concentrating their fire on her building. Bullets shattered the remaining windows around her, and she could hear soldiers entering the building's lower floors. Elena made a desperate decision. Instead of trying to escape through the building, she would make her way to the roof and attempt to reach the adjacent structure through a dangerous leap across an alley. The alternative was almost certain capture, which would mean not only her own death, but the exposure of her secret that had protected so many civilians. The climb to the roof required passing through floors, actively being searched by enemy soldiers. Elena moved like smoke through the damaged building, using her intimate knowledge of urban warfare to avoid detection. Several times she passed within meters of soldiers who had no idea their primary target was breathing silently in the shadows nearby. The roof access was partially blocked by debris, but Elena managed to squeeze through the opening just as enemy forces reached the 8th floor where she had been positioned. The jump to the adjacent building required a running leap across a gap that seemed impossible in the morning light. But Elena had no choice. She landed hard on the neighboring roof, her ankle twisting painfully on impact. The enemy soldiers were now firing from the building she had just escaped, their bullets striking the roof around her as she crawled toward another access point. Elena could feel blood running down her leg from a graze on her thigh, but adrenaline masked the pain. The building she had reached was occupied by civilian families who had nowhere else to go. Elena's presence put them all at risk, but she needed medical attention for her injuries and time to plan her escape route. She made her way to the stairwell, intending to reach street level and return to the hospital. On the 4th floor, Elena encountered something that would change everything. A young girl, perhaps 8 years old, was sitting alone in a doorway, crying softly. When she saw Elena's bloody uniform and the rifle she carried, the child should have been terrified. Instead, she smiled with recognition. "You're the angel," the little girl whispered. "Mama says there's an angel who protects us from the bad men with guns. She said you saved her friend last week." Elena knelt beside the child, overwhelmed by the innocence and trust in her eyes. "What's your name, sweetheart?" "Milica. Are you hurt? I can get Mama to help you." Elena realized that her reputation among the civilian population was more widespread than she had imagined. The Phantom Sniper wasn't just a military mystery. She had become a symbol of hope for families trapped in the nightmare of war. "I'll be okay, Milica. But I need you to do something very important for me. Can you tell your mama that the bad men are gone from the school shelter? The families there are safe now." The little girl nodded seriously, as if she understood the weight of the message. Elena gave her a small bandage from her medical supplies, a token that would serve as proof of their encounter. Elena's escape from the area took 3 hours of careful movement through basements and damaged buildings. By the time she reached the hospital, her injuries were causing significant pain, but she couldn't seek treatment without raising questions about how a nurse had sustained gunshot wounds. Instead, Elena retreated to her basement quarters and used her medical knowledge to treat herself. The bullet graze on her thigh required careful cleaning and bandaging, while her ankle needed to be wrapped tightly to reduce swelling. She would have to work through the pain and hope that no one noticed her slight limp. James Mitchell was waiting in the hospital's main corridor when Elena emerged for her shift. His presence felt like a trap, though his expression remained friendly and professional. "Nurse Petrov, I'm James Mitchell from the London Herald. I'm documenting the humanitarian impact of the siege, and several patients have mentioned your exceptional dedication. Would you have time for a brief interview?" Elena forced herself to appear calm while her heart raced. "I just do my job, Mr. Mitchell. There are many dedicated people working here. That's exactly what makes your story interesting, James replied. In the middle of this chaos, you managed to navigate the dangerous streets to help families like the Murricks. Anna told me you personally ensured her grandson's safety during her hospitalization. Elena felt the conversation becoming dangerous territory. The community takes care of each other during difficult times. It's nothing extraordinary. James nodded, but his eyes showed he wasn't satisfied with her modest deflection. There are rumors that someone has been systematically eliminating the snipers who target civilians. The timing often correlates with areas where you've been providing medical outreach. Have you noticed any connection? Elena met his gaze directly, knowing that any sign of nervousness would confirm his suspicions. Mr. Mitchell, I'm a nurse. I save lives, not take them. If someone is protecting civilians from snipers, then I'm grateful for their actions, but I have no knowledge of who that might be. The statement was technically truthful while being completely misleading, and Elena could see James recognizing the careful phrasing. She excused herself to attend to patients, but she could feel his analytical gaze following her movements throughout the day. That afternoon brought disturbing news. James had been interviewing civilians throughout the city, and several had described encounters with a mysterious woman who provided medical aid in dangerous areas. The descriptions were vague, but the pattern was becoming clear to anyone willing to look for connections. Elena realized that her dual existence was becoming unsustainable. The Phantom Sniper's reputation had grown beyond her ability to control, and James Mitchell's investigation was closing in on her identity. She had perhaps days before her secret was exposed, putting not only herself but also the hospital and all its patients at risk. As the sun set over the besieged city, Elena faced an impossible choice. She could abandon her nighttime activities and allow civilian casualties to mount, or she could continue her mission knowing that discovery and capture seemed inevitable. The decision was made for her when young Peter Merrick arrived at the hospital with devastating news. His grandmother Anna had died from complications related to her sniper wound, and he was now completely alone in the city. Worse, he had overheard enemy soldiers planning an attack on his apartment building, targeting the families who lived there because they had been providing aid to the hospital. Elena looked at Petar's tear-streaked face and knew that her war was far from over. That night, the Phantom Sniper would face her greatest challenge yet, protecting an entire apartment building while avoiding capture by both enemy forces and a determined journalist who was closer than ever to exposing her identity. The attack on Petar's apartment building was scheduled for midnight, giving Elena barely 6 hours to prepare for what she knew would be her most dangerous mission. The enemy forces had chosen the location specifically because its residents had been supporting the hospital with supplies and information, making this assault both strategic and personal. Elena spent the evening hours creating a comprehensive defense plan while maintaining her normal duties at the hospital. She memorized the building's layout, identified optimal firing positions, and calculated escape routes. Most importantly, she contacted trusted civilians in the area through the hospital's underground network, warning them to evacuate vulnerable residents before the attack began. James Mitchell seemed to sense the tension in the air that evening. He lingered in the hospital corridors longer than usual, observing staff interactions and asking subtle questions about Elena's schedule and activities. Elena could feel his journalistic instincts working, piecing together fragments of information that might reveal her secret. The Phantom Sniper seems to know when attacks are planned before they happen, James mentioned casually during a conversation with Dr. Kovic. That suggests either inside intelligence or incredible ability to read enemy patterns. Elena, who was changing bandages at a nearby patient bed, forced herself not to react to his words. She had indeed developed an extensive network of informants throughout the city, people who overheard enemy conversations and reported suspicious movements. This intelligence network was one of her most valuable assets, but it also created additional risks of exposure. As darkness fell over Sarajevo, Elena made her final preparations. She carried extra ammunition, emergency medical supplies, and a radio for coordinating with friendly forces if the situation became desperate. Most unusually, she also carried a sealed letter addressed to Dr. Kovic, explaining her actions and apologizing for the deception she had maintained. The apartment building stood on a slight hill, surrounded by smaller structures that provided multiple approach routes for attacking forces. Elena positioned herself in a bombed-out office building 300 meters away, where she had clear sight lines to the major access points. Her plan was to delay the attack long enough for civilian evacuation while avoiding the direct confrontation that had nearly captured her during the refugee shelter defense. Through her scope, Elena watched enemy soldiers moving into position around the building. Their confidence was obvious. They expected to encounter minimal resistance from sleeping civilians. They had no idea that their movements were being tracked by someone who had studied their tactics for months. The first indication of trouble came when the lead assault team's radio operator suddenly collapsed. Elena's shot had been perfect, disabling their communications without alerting them to her presence. The second shot eliminated a sniper who had positioned himself to cover the building's main entrance, creating confusion among the attacking forces about the direction of the threat. For the next 20 minutes, Elena conducted a masterful campaign of psychological warfare. Instead of engaging in sustained combat, she picked off individual soldiers at carefully chosen moments, creating the impression that the entire area was defended by multiple hidden marksmen. Enemy forces found themselves constantly looking over their shoulders, never knowing when the next precise shot would claim another victim. But Elena's greatest challenge came when she realized that James Mitchell was in the target building. The journalist had apparently followed her earlier intelligence gathering activities to their source, arriving at Peter's apartment building just as the attack began. Through her scope, Elena could see him crouched in a ground floor window, using his camera to document the assault, while seemingly unaware of the deadly crossfire developing around him. Elena faced an impossible choice. Revealing her position to rescue James would likely result in her capture or death, ending her ability to protect other civilians. However, allowing a journalist who had shown genuine concern for the city's residents to be killed was morally unacceptable. She made her decision quickly. Elena abandoned her concealed position and began moving toward the apartment building, using rooftops and damaged walls to avoid enemy detection. Her rifle would be less effective during close-quarters combat, but she carried a pistol that had belonged to her late brother. The journey across 300 meters of hostile territory took Elena through the most dangerous terrain she had ever navigated. Enemy soldiers were actively searching for her, while stray bullets from the ongoing assault created additional hazards. Twice she had to take cover in rubble piles, while patrol groups passed within meters of her location. Elena reached the apartment building through a basement entrance, emerging into a corridor filled with terrified residents who had been unable to evacuate. Among them was Petar, who recognized her immediately, despite her camouflaged appearance. "The angel came," he whispered to the other civilians. "We're going to be safe." Elena felt the weight of their expectations and hopes, knowing that she might not be able to fulfill the faith they had placed in her. She moved through the building methodically, guiding civilians to safer locations while engaging enemy soldiers who had begun entering the structure. The close-quarters combat was unlike her usual long-distance work. Elena found herself relying on instincts and training she hadn't used since her grandfather's lessons years earlier. Each encounter was brief but potentially fatal, requiring split-second decisions and perfect execution. On the third floor, Elena found James Mitchell trapped in an apartment with an elderly couple who had been too frightened to leave. Enemy soldiers were systematically searching rooms, and their voices indicated they were only minutes away from discovering the hiding spot. "Mr. Mitchell," Elena whispered, appearing in the doorway like a ghost. "You need to come with me now." James stared at her in shock, taking in her rifle, tactical gear, and the determined expression that was completely unlike the gentle nurse he had interviewed hours earlier. In that moment, all his suspicions crystallized into certainty. "You're the phantom sniper," he said, his voice filled with amazement rather than accusation. "Right now, I'm someone trying to keep you alive," Elena replied. "Can you help me get these people to safety?" James didn't hesitate. He assisted the elderly couple while Elena led them toward a stairwell that remained uncompromised by enemy forces. The journalist's respect for human life outweighed his desire for a story, at least in that critical moment. The evacuation of the building's remaining civilians required Elena to engage enemy forces directly multiple times. Her ammunition ran low as she provided cover fire for groups of residents fleeing toward safer buildings. The combat was intense and chaotic, nothing like the calculated precision of her sniper work. During one engagement, Elena sustained a bullet wound to her shoulder that sent waves of pain through her body. She continued fighting despite the injury, knowing that dozens of lives depended on her ability to maintain the defense long enough for everyone to escape. James proved to be more than just an observer during the crisis. He helped carry wounded civilians and even picked up a rifle from a fallen enemy soldier. Though his shooting skills were clearly amateur compared to Elena's expertise, his presence actually helped Elena by providing an extra pair of eyes and hands during the most critical moments. The battle for the apartment building lasted until dawn, when government forces finally arrived to drive off the remaining attackers. Elena had successfully evacuated 43 civilians, including several families with small children who would have been helpless against the assault. The cost had been significant. Her ammunition was exhausted, she was wounded in 2 places, and her secret identity was now known to an international journalist. As the immediate danger passed, Elena and James found themselves alone in the building's damaged lobby. The morning light streaming through broken windows illuminated the destruction around them while highlighting the exhaustion on both their faces. "How long have you been doing this?" James asked quietly. "Since my brother was killed 8 months ago," Elena replied. Too tired for deception, someone had to stop them from targeting innocent people. James nodded slowly, his journalist's mind clearly processing the implications of her revelation. "The authorities don't know?" "Nobody knows except you," Elena said. "And now you have to decide what to do with that knowledge." The conversation that followed would determine not only Elena's fate, but also the future of civilian protection in the besieged city. James explained that his investigation had been motivated by admiration rather than desire to expose her, and Elena shared the moral struggles that accompanied her double life. "You save lives during the day and take them at night," James observed. "How do you reconcile those contradictions?" Elena looked out at the city where smoke still rose from the latest round of violence. "Every person I've killed was actively targeting civilians. Every shot I've taken has prevented murders of innocent people. I'm not proud of the killing, but I'm proud of the lives that were saved. In many of those cases, the book said in the book." James spent 3 days documenting Elena's story, but not for publication. Instead, he worked with her to create a comprehensive record of her activities that could serve as evidence of war crimes committed by enemy forces. His articles about the siege continued to focus on civilian suffering and international aid efforts, never mentioning the phantom sniper by name. The revelation of Elena's identity to James marked the beginning of a new phase in her mission. With someone else aware of her activities, she could receive limited logistical support and better intelligence about enemy movements. More importantly, she gained a witness who could ensure that her actions would be remembered accurately, regardless of what happened to her. Elena continued her work as both nurse and sniper for 6 more months, until the siege finally ended. During that time, she prevented numerous attacks on civilian targets and saved countless lives through both her medical skills and her marksmanship. The Phantom Sniper became legendary among Sarajevo's residents, a symbol of hope during their darkest hours. When peace finally came to the city, Elena chose to remain anonymous despite opportunities for recognition and honors. She continued working as a nurse, dedicating her life to healing rather than warfare. James kept his promise never to reveal her identity publicly, though he maintained contact with her for years afterward. The story of the Phantom Sniper became one of the conflict's most enduring mysteries, inspiring books and documentaries that speculated about the identity of the unknown protector. Elena found satisfaction in knowing that the legend had grown beyond her individual actions, becoming a symbol of civilian resistance against those who would target innocent people. In quiet moments, Elena sometimes wondered about the paths not taken, what her life might have been like without the war that forced her to become something she never intended to be. But she never regretted the choices she made during those dark months when death stalked the streets of her city. She had proven that sometimes the greatest act of healing is preventing wounds from occurring in the first place. The young nurse who had once said, "This is the end," to herself in her darkest moments had instead become the beginning of hope for hundreds of people who survived because someone was willing to stand between them and those who would destroy them. Her story remained hidden, known only to those whose lives she had touched directly, but the impact of her actions rippled through the city long after the guns fell silent. Years later, when Elena looked back on that period of her life, she realized that she had learned something profound about the nature of heroism. Heroes aren't always the people who seek recognition or glory. Sometimes they're the ones who quietly do what needs to be done, bearing the weight of difficult choices so that others can sleep safely. The Phantom Sniper had been many things: protector, killer, healer, guardian, but above all, she had been someone who refused to let evil triumph over innocence.